Supriya.
Welcome back to the SDA podcast on energy and life mastery. And I really am so happy to have you on this pre-solar eclipse day. And it's so lovely to have you again. And this is all about your forte. This is about your realm. But of course, we're involved. So the topic, as I propose that you share and educate us on, is global warming, climate change. What do we need to know, Kana? What's happening? What do we need to know?
Thank you so much, sister, again, for inviting me. It's always a delight to share with you. It's an honor to share the space with yourself and each of your viewers or listeners and participants. It'd be so fun in time to gather in person, all together and riff about this.
Soon.
Yeah, soon come. Thank you so much, darling. I mean, this is one of the biggest topics of our collective journeys and our individual lives, and also, multi-generational. It's the a lot of people have mentioned it as the Anthropocene, and so like an era of us facing our own potential existential crises. And of course, coupled with that is a lot of internal potential existential crises as well. And as I know you relate in regards to all matters of the soul and the personal journey, from my experience, global warming, climate change, what's happening on the outside in terms of what seemingly is societal collapse or a reconfiguration, is what's been happening on our inner realms and our inner worlds, in some ways playing out in the external environment. And so, this has been going on for a lot of us in the movement, speaking up for what's necessary in terms of solutions for many decades. And so it's exciting on one side, in my experience, in the sense that this decade, ethical investing, green finance, for example, has really arrived in terms of its time. Sustainability is well known across the world. We don't really need to convince anyone anymore of the validity of sustainability. And so on that side, on the industry side, what I see every day is that it's exciting, as in there's a legion of us, there's thousands of us that are on the spearhead or the frontier of co-creating solutions and investing in social impact entrepreneurs or regenerative energy entrepreneurs, left, right, and center. And so in this demographic, we're very excited. And then what I witness in terms of the majority public, the storytelling and the message isn't getting through to the majority public of all the solutions that are not only possible, but are also being worked on the ground, behind the scenes, amongst thousands of documents and so forth. So I would say that's one of the elements that breaks my heart the most. And that's one of the areas that I'm most passionate about being a bridge for, that we all have a place to contribute to the solution. And we are each a part of it. I mean, on a personal level and on a collective level. And so yeah. I feel like that's one of my core messages, is to share with people that please don't feel despair. And I know it's part of the process, but don't stay in despair. Really, really do your best to stretch and to look and listen to certain stories or content or data or messaging from sources that are new, that you may not be used to. To really learn more of the whole full spectrum context, and it will take time. I mean, climate change and the breakdown of all our systems has taken decades or centuries to co-create. So please be gentle on ourselves and each other, to not feel like you need to know all the solutions overnight, and we need to figure everything out overnight, even though there is there's a timeline, of course, but there's balance in everything. And so that's, I feel like that's one of the core messages. For example, we're in Australia, we're streaming from Australia. To the best of my knowledge, the national government isn't world leading in regards to its pace and its policy from what I know, though, of the state government, every state government in our country is investing so much in solutions, for example, renewable energy, or so much of the circular economy. Perhaps they're not perfect for now, but at least they're moving on a lot of different indicators. So that's a whole nother example of not being in despair, like just because a lot of the media is focusing on the national government and what they're not doing. I mean, they're also doing some good things behind the scenes. State and some local governments are also doing really good work. And so one of the pieces of advice that I would offer, you know, to really get involved in local council wherever you are as much as possible. And read if there is a green sustainability, climate change, or resilience plan in the local council, you know, get involved. If there isn't one, why isn't there one? Perhaps you could, whomever's listening, could co-create a group or a committee or an action group to then be involved and engaged, and you'll feel so much more empowered for that, rather than being on the sideline and to some degree perhaps feeling overwhelmed by it. And of course, just get involved on any level, like all the levels if you want, on a global level as well, and everything in between.
Thanks. Yeah, I really like your compassionate outlook and approach to it. And I like how you know, like you said, I really agree with you, because I think a lot of us don't take action because firstly, guilt sets in. And, you know, when we look at the bigger picture, and then we say, oh, well, what can I do? I'm only one person. And even if I do this, what difference is that going to make? And then sometimes not having enough spokespeople around us, talking, conversing, and making it just a lifestyle topic, can make us feel like we have to become activists, and that takes a lot of energy as well. So no one wants to become an activist if they don't have the energy. So people give up very quickly, you know. And because our lives, one of my drivers for doing this episode is basically to educate and start the narrative to normalize this topic in our lives, because I think some of us are very, what's the word, disassociated to it, with it, because of where we live. Certain suburbs, certain grids of places kind of have its associated lifestyle, and demographically speaking, people are using their spare time to just relax, you know, and so concepts or issues like, you know, global warming, climate change, and what we can kind of weave into our lifestyles, just little things, little things to whatever we can take on as per our lifestyle, is a conversation I think we need to start having, because I think inherently we all want to do good, and it has to just, you know, sometimes it's just a matter of ease and accessibility and doing it without, you know, putting ourselves out.
So on point. Yeah. Particularly in terms of accessibility. Supriya. Yeah, I find that it's, like you said, you know, most people are really good people. We all mean well, do well, and we want to do well. And when we're educated about the consequences of some of our actions, then we're like, okay, well, that's not preferable. So then the social entrepreneurs and you know, I call us artivist custodians. Some of us are more like artistic activists and so forth. I mean, I know there's a fusion and a spectrum. You know, it's up to us to co-create these solutions and to increase accessibility. And in the communities that we've grown up in, a real particular passion of mine is to invest in support services like translation of these services. I mean, a lot of it, you know, like be culturally aware and culturally respectful of the fact that a lot of different cultural diasporas may not know what's going on in terms of, they may not read the English mainstream, right? And so,
Yes,
yeah, I feel
there's a
like that's really
gap.
important.
There's a gap. For whatever reason, there are many grids of our society that that don't even get this sort of communication delivered to them based on these gaps, you know, whether it's our lifestyle, our heritage, our culture, or whatever conditions are around us. But like the councils do a lot in terms of signage and provisions and whatever. I think it's all been, you know, done within budget and all that. I feel like, you know, there's a need for just making an effort to have a conversation about, hey, what does sustainability look like? And how does that translate to, or how does that impact the globe's sustainability? You know, and like you were saying, it is, of course, it's connected to our personal well-being, or planning and actions create this world that we live in. What do you recommend, or what do you think that people need to start or can do without having to spend any time outside of what they normally do? Like, what can they get educated on?
It's a big question. I mean, it really depends on their particular interest, or, you know, I find with every single person there's at least one solution or one issue that they could learn about, contribute to. And, you know, one in particular that doesn't seem to have such an effect at the beginning, although it's such a long-term, deeply rooted solution. And it may not be as, you know, quote unquote sexy. I think that's
it.
Really,
that's another reason I think people don't even bother, because it's not going to be a sexy thing. So it's
quote
not
unquote
really something pop culture. But actually, let me rephrase that as well with an addition to that question is, what are the top problems that you feel people have that they can get started to look at that contributes towards global warming and fixing or contributing towards solutions?
Okay, so 5 of probably many more, but I mean, the first one I would say intuitively is, and COVID has contributed to the solution of this, is that literally everything we do or we don't do will affect somebody somewhere around the planet, and whether it's in our generation or future generations. That would be like one of my biggest prayers, is to really, really understand and feel the gravitas of that. I mean, of course, again, without feeling too much despair, like, but it's
right. It's such a practice. Relevant. It's a relevant thing.
It's a practice, and you get, like, in my experience, you get better at it over time. I mean, I would say number 2 is food waste. So food waste, and that was the unsexy, quote unquote, you know, unsexy element. It's a high contributor to a lot of emissions, and also, you know, eating a plant-based diet actually is such a high contributor to the rebalancing of emissions as well. And so that's, I mean, there's different moral or ethical issues. Huge.
That is so powerful.
And I mean, so that was 3. And then, I mean, the fact that number 4 is that I really wish to continue to, you know, share that message that we really are more powerful than we a lot of times give ourselves credit for.
Without having to be the savior of the world.
Indeed, you know? But there's a middle point. Like and I think to reshift our model and what we think a savior, quote unquote, of the world is. It's so important to give so much more honor and respect to the dignity of simple and yet really impactful work. You know, so for example, a garbage collector, I think it's so important to actually really honor like simple, seemingly mundane actions, just as a thought experiment. If there were no garbage collectors, quote unquote, right, in modern society, we'd be getting a lot more disease, and there'd be a lot more distress in people's individual lives. And it's just one example of so much we take for granted in modern society. So those are some key areas. And
that is really powerful too. Can we just go back to number one? You said is understanding. What I heard was karma, isn't it? Like what
karma?
I do.
Yes.
Has
and think that we're interconnected. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, the interconnectedness of my actions, thoughts, feelings having such a ripple effect on everything around me, including myself, so as a result. But what did you say, like knowing and remembering that your choices have an impact?
Absolutely. On people that you may never meet, on people who are born in 50 years, 100 years, 200 years, we don't know, and to really act as stewards on that level, rather than one-dimensional short-term thinking, which is a lot of the illness that how the current system is created.
And again, no one's to blame. No, we can't blame and shame and get anywhere positive. So at least I think what we should remind our listeners is like, yes, okay, guilt is part of the first step of recognizing that most of us are making mistakes, not all the time intentionally, but there are mistakes we are making, and it is a good starting point to start noticing and asking ourselves, well, how is this going to impact others? How is this choice going to impact others? And and creating different values or aligning to different values to create different actions.
And learning. Really taking that space, carving that space in our lives to learn. Just as some offshoots, as examples, I'd really highly recommend people look up a system of thinking called permaculture. I have part of my background in permaculture, and I would say that it's been one of the deepest gifts of my life to find a systems of thinking that's systems-based, circular, and is audacious in terms of its commitment to systems change, and yet so humble and so grounded that it starts from learning about different plants and organic farms, and how for example, an organic farm is a representation or analogy of how we should be co-designing the world. It's actually all one and the same. So I'd highly recommend that. Of course, looking up films and books like 2040, highly recommend that book. And also transition towns. I'd really suggest people look up transition towns as a movement that started a few decades ago. Very grassroots, and yet its ideas have permeated so many different leaders in sustainability, and very humble in their approach, and yet effective in their own way. So a lot of the work for me, for Global Impact Group and Frontier Regen Capital, and a number of the projects that I'm committed to and have been working on, is on the macro level of systems change, but it's also like waterfall effect from the global level to the national level, and regional, local, and personal, interpersonal, and then it permeates and sort of synthesizes, fractals out into all these different facets of society. And whether it's the arts or education or law or media or finance or well-being, it's a topic that we're both passionate about. So it's all here to co-create together, and that's the message as well. Like, it's exciting. We're creating the new decades and the new world, and sort of like resoiling a new palette for all the generations to come. So that ideally, the prayer is that when they're born, this type of despair or this type of thinking is in the history books. Ideally that they'll grow up and be like, I can't even imagine how they would have lived in those times, so consumeristic and so wasteful and so forth, and non-circular and non-regenerative. That would be our success barometer, for us as elders and custodians, that if we have then you know, been gifted a world that has many ailments and of course many gifts as well, and yet, like you were saying, we don't stay stuck in blame and shame. We honor responsibility where it needs to be honored, and we completely forge forward, and we then like invert and then transform and metamorphosize into even a more beautiful world than we can imagine. And I truly believe with every cell and iota of my being that it's absolutely possible. We do have all the tools.
Yes.
You know, it's just about, it's about commitment and fortitude and connecting with values that are beyond a price point. It's beyond anything you could put a price on. And so then that's the challenge, to like traverse into this new world with deep patience with oneself and each other, and not place judgment on certain, like with certain values lens that we've been taught by a post-industrial revolution and economy, like basically competitive and exploitative and destructive. And we practice taking that lens off and I'm emptying our vessel and taking our time to just have a clear vessel first and foremost before we even add anything else in. So it's a process, and I'm grateful we're on it together, Supriya. And
yes, pound. Awesome. That was amazing. That's number one. Number two, you said waste, food waste.
Our food systems, like learning about our food systems and how they interrelate.
Where can we go and do a little bit of a 101 food waste?
Oh, I mean, good. TED Talks, go TED Talks.
No, even simpler. What does it look like in your household?
Yes, and I was going to get to that. So I would highly recommend anyone who doesn't have a compost bin to receive a compost bin. You know, whether it's a small one that you can place in a kitchen top, and if you could create a compost bin for your apartment block or whichever.
I can't.
Why is that, darling?
Believe me, I've tried this and we can't because of the way the building's set up. This is why this has been a thing of mine from 2017 when I woke up to this issue. And I'm unable to, because of the way the building system is set up for compost and all that. But okay, so what else?
So I mean, so with that, darling, I mean, I feel like there's always ways around everything. And yeah, you know, there's public bins that are green bins that are food organics, you know. So just as an example, or then you know, somehow whomever lives in apartment buildings, for example, come together and co-create a local community garden, or rooftop gardens. Rooftop farms are like the new big thing to some degree in the green, one of the sectors of the green movement. So, and then like, and even though if you don't have finance for that, that's okay. Just put together a project proposal, and then, you know, people like me, we're creating platforms so that people can submit their ideas for what they need support for. And then people like us will collaborate then with local councils to invest in these solutions. Or if local council won't do it, then fine, we will independently finance it, you know.
That's
so
great.
it's that full sovereignty and full responsibility. And so basically the encouragement is for people to have ideas and don't think that they're either too hard or too big, or that I don't have money for that. Just really honor the fact that it needs to exist, and so then speak out for it and trust that the support networks will form around that the more you stand for it. So
we actually invited my friend Alina. She used to work in the Holroyd Council, and she's big on composting and all that. So she came and did a workshop for our community, yoga community, and showed us how to create worm farms and how to create your own composting thing inside a flat situation. And some of us tried it, and then it got too stinky, too smelly and everything like that. So it is a challenge to do it in a city, in an area where you're not living on ground, you're not living on, like, you know, in a house kind of a place. Anyway, but those are good ideas. I've heard of them before, and I think it's completely accessible. You can go to hardware stores and get a compost bin for less than $60, you know, and that will last for a long time.
True, but then there's certain apartments that won't fit that. But I mean, and and yet I really appreciate you sharing with me your experience and the challenges. And so then again, the more you voice that out, the more someone like myself would understand what the challenges are, and then we all co-design that moving forward. I mean, there's maybe a potential for council, like, to order green bins from the council for the buildings itself, and then you put the food waste into the green bins. But this is like, I mean, I love
this is a bigger thing.
detailing.
This is a bigger thing, because there are lots of so when we talk about food waste, we're really talking about how to manage waste. Is that right? Is that how we're talking?
A big part. Well, yes. Also, I mean, the reason why I mentioned food waste in particular is because then we're more connected to the organic process of life. Like when we just like shut our eyes and just like quote unquote chuck something away, I mean, then nothing is ever really away. So in my experience, it teaches people how, like, that they're part of a deeper web of organic life. And then I found it affects people's choices in so many other areas, even though it's seemingly a small action. You know, then these people are more predisposed to go to tree planting days, or invest in regenerative agriculture farms, or invest in mangrove farms, or and it's like amazing. So I feel like something like that is such a daily interaction that we need to have that as an example in our lives. You know, there's the example of plants, for example, in our lives. That's great and that's beautiful. There's beauty in that, but it's just so important to have an organic process that's decaying in our lives to actually show us and remind us the rhythm of life, especially in an urban area, is my point. That we can
absolutely that is the thing. And one time one of our friends brought this up, and it really, really woke me up again. It was one of those, truth pokes. He said something like, nowadays we're not even asking, with the fast food industry and the way how fast our life is, and how we shop at supermarkets and everything like that. It desensitizes our awareness of where the food came from.
Exactly.
So that's a majority of us living in the city, so urban societies. A lot of us are reliant on supermarkets and late night shopping, and all that. So organic markets are open in the daytime or whatever, so just keeping it simple here, just basically wanting to talk about how we're all affected by this whole fast moving, fast paced world, and what lifestyle we tend to live in, and the inertia that we have that stops us from connecting to the food, the world that you just mentioned, that by looking at what I throw away, I also realize what I didn't use, and why did it even come into my life in the first place? Why did I grab that in the first place? But a lot of us don't have the bandwidth or the actual influences in our lives to ask ourselves, why did I do that? But I want to also point out this, something I was pondering on during the pandemic lockdown times. I did a post on ginger being, again, coming back to the normal price it was. But during the pandemic, because there was a shortage, the prices had gone up, and because there was higher demand as well, because of whatever, the
people staying at home more.
home more. And ginger is one of the go-to herbs, for culinary herbs for digestive system. So a lot of people started using it more. But I think, during the pandemic, a lot of people woke up to the fact that they need to eat more natural foods rather than the takeaway foods. And there was a shortage of it as well. So people couldn't order takeaway. They had to make their food. So I feel like, we maybe have made a little bit of progress toward this already, looking at it as a blessing. But I completely think that is a workshop on its own.
Oh, totally. Yeah. It's a whole campaign, and within campaigns.
Yes. Like, educating people on, the food that you buy, where it came from, and you need to pay attention to that, and how it's packaged, what it's costing us to do that, and how it's stored, what you're doing to that.
Absolutely. The ripple effects. And just a quick note, my love, on a recommendation of something practical and very 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 reachable that we could do is, for example, so that we just spoke about fast food, and fast fashion is one of the most detrimental industries on the planet for the planet. And so just setting ourselves a simple goal that in 1 year, give yourself a maximum of, say, 5 or 6 or 7, 8, 10, for example, items of quote unquote new items, or maybe they could be pre-loved items. But, really be honest with ourselves, like, do we really need more than that? Like, where is it coming from if you have an overdrive of you have this set mentality that you need a certain set of new items, new apparel items every year? And, I would lovingly challenge that it's actually really quite minimal. Some of the most elegant, graceful, honorable women and men of the world that I've met, and most of them are from wisdom cultures of indigenous cultures all around the world. It's amazing, Supriya. They wear their saris, or they wear their indigenous cultural wear with such pride, and they only have 1 or 2 or 3 of them, for example. I mean, they wear it every day. They don't need more because they've invested their heart and soul in weaving that beautiful patterns, and those patterns have symbols and stories that represent who they are and where they come from, and it's exquisite. I mean, you can't buy that with money, that type of grace and that type of virtue. And I have a real deep respect for cultures like that, and I feel like if we become more like that, then so much of this quote unquote happiness that we're all striving for, it's all here for us. I mean, slow is the new fast, and so I'm a little bit more experienced in this field to some degree, granted, because my mother's a seamstress, and so I grew up witnessing her taking apart clothes and learning how to create clothes and creating a whole livelihood, like in her own sovereignty and her own resilience. No one taught her. And so, I mean, I guess I could have a little bit more of a experience around that growing up. It's the amazing feeling to learn how to design your own apparel and then create it. I mean, it's challenging. Like, if you've not had practice, it's very challenging. And then even that as a practice, I think people will really honor the t-shirt or whichever apparel that they've taken off the rack, off a very seemingly modern environment like the shops. But a lot of those apparel is created within, like buildings and rows of factories of people who are better and better conditions, but on the whole, they're really challenging conditions. And I think if people learn what it takes to even create something, then the intention is that people have much more respect and gratitude for what it takes to receive something like that, rather than just a straight up dollar value. Which a lot of that is illusionary value, in the sense that, like a $2 top doesn't actually really cost $2. It's costing somebody's livelihood and energy, and they might have had to walk 3 hours to a factory. Absolutely, right. And a lot of these factory workers come from countries of our cultural diaspora, so I feel very particularly passionate about this. So that's another.
Can I add something to that? I feel like especially people from our culture will buy those $2 tops in thinking that they're supporting people of that country. Right. But there's this other effect that we're not being made aware of, that, this is keeping a different kind of industry alive, which is adding toward the stripping away of sustainability on a whole, so
absolutely. Yeah,
I mean, don't get me wrong, there's a spectrum of products and services for everybody, for whatever stage of life and consciousness they're at. And I think there's, from where you and I are both sitting, I know people that are living our values and, core values 24/7. They're breathing, living. And like you were mentioning, those graceful, leaders, conscious community leaders. I've been following many. I've found many, as I've opened my mind to this concept of minimalism, but without sacrifice of my own style, of my own appreciation for beauty, art, and whatever it is, and accessibility at the same time, based on my budget, based on my accessibility, and considering my ethics, that I'm not going to contribute towards. I think it is possible when we open our minds to, like you were mentioning, to get clear about what is it that I desire. And just a little bit of questioning, like, why do I want this? Do I really need this? Do I really need like it in every color? And do I, this is the thing. And some of the things that we get convinced of is that if you don't get it, then you won't have it. It's the FOMO industry as well. Like the firstly, it's a really nice thing to look at, but then how many times are you going to wear it? Is this a functional item, or is this like an item that you're purchasing just to show off for one or two things,
Precisely.
So that is a completely different life versus what we're talking about, aren't we? We're looking towards actually moving away from the shiny object syndrome and the FOMO world, and moving towards more of a self what would you call it, like what you were saying,
a self-initiated or self-virtuous
leadership in the choices you make, and supporting like-minded. So sorry, might sound a bit scattered with the way I'm saying it, but when I started opening my mind to this and questioning the way I buy things for myself when it comes to attire and clothes, I started to find more designers and more influencers in that field who are doing it like ethical sourcing, making one piece or two or three pieces of the same kind, designing clothes of a shape that will last you a few different stages of life, not just, when you look your fittest or when you look your flabbiest, for female centric designers. And all of that, and so there are people thinking in this way, already, and they are living their mission to serve us if we want it.
Yes,
so
if we're open.
If we're open to it, there are people doing that. And then they are also working with tribal communities. They're working with indigenous communities. They're working for World Trade things, like the organizations. And that's really inspiring, because that's one step I can take, from this little cubicle that I live in Sydney City.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can do that.
Absolutely. It's so, it touches so many layers of our sense of self, and it's a beautiful practice, and it's a beautiful example. So I'm really grateful, of course, you're open to it. And then, it's, again, let's think creatively. It's like you were saying, it's not giving up our love for beauty or culture or story, in terms of what it means to apparelize a certain way. It's like, well, if there's certain frocks that once or twice or three times a year, then let's come together locally and create like a shared service. Like it's stored in a public space. Somehow QR codes, you get in, and then there's a catalog online and you see what's available, and then it's refreshing for everyone, like in terms of, oh, that's something new, but I know it, like it's been like kind of reused 1,000 times within our community and really looked after. That to me gives me so much more joy than buying it off the rack. And then and then all these, like, literally, my love, there's like mountains of these toxic clothes. In, like, for example, in Ghana, and and it's probably many other places, that because we don't see it, and I know these stories are going to be shared more and more, but like certain people in villages in Ghana can't breathe properly because of the toxic from these clothes that are like literally stacked like mountain loads. So yeah, it's just so important to really, again, think holistically and really think of others.
One thing I want to add to that whole clothes swap or rent thing, back even 10 years ago, I found a place where you could rent garments for special occasions. It's happening in Sydney. If it's happening here, I'm sure it's happening everywhere else. It's just not marketed. It's just not marketed, and it's just not mainstream popular idea to go ahead and hire something or swaps or exchange things, you know, instead of just going out and spending that money on something that's so, you know, such a trend thing, you know.
Totally.
So
And that's
that's a
where the
really good
investment, that's one of the
point.
gaps. So sorry, Danny.
Yes.
Yeah, that's one of the, again, you know, there's a whole long list of the investment gaps and the support gaps that we need to
Yes.
support. And you know, a number of us will moving forward. And again, a lot of it is not what looks shiny and sexy. It's a lot of it is investing in the plumbing, like investing in, quote unquote, in the analogy, and also practical plumbing. Like it's those parts and pieces where they're actually really vital to then flourish a certain solution. And so a number of us, I think it's just important to be disciplined and to go through, like actually going through being the change maker in some of these areas. It's okay, it's not going to be as flashy, but that's okay, because that's what we need, you know. And in time, I think things are going to shift, and we create meaning around you know, different roles that we contribute to in life.
Yeah. So that was, it came from food waste, but it's actually just waste, you know, that the waste that we produce in life in general, like whatever we consume, consumerism, whatever waste that's creating. And it's a good place to start to look at, you know, what do I spend my money on? And what do I do with that item? You know, what does it do for me? And do I really need it? The third one you mentioned was plant-based food choices that could really shift.
Eating a plant-based diet, ideally. Sorry, you were saying?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't have the statistics off the top of my head, but it's, and I would like to actually, but it's, I mean, next to the whole ethical, moral conversation around taking life when we don't need to, that's a whole nother realm. But it's these emissions from not only delivery of the livestock, but also, you know, them being on land that's not then used for regenerative agriculture, it's used for livestock. It's magnanimous in terms of its effect on global emissions. So that's, yeah, and I know that's a monumental cultural shift for a number of people, because there's a lot of like endearment towards certain foods that people have grown up with and culturally connected with.
Can I ask you a question out of curiosity? That word emission, can you go into a little bit about that? Like, what does that mean when it comes to livestock, or, you know, looking at the food, the plant-based versus non-plant-based?
Yeah, greenhouse emissions is what I mean. Yeah, GHG, and methane is a very potent greenhouse that gets emitted. And methane, it comes from different industries, but cows emit it just by living and detoxing their bowels. So, you know, there's solutions that we're attempting in the industry to mitigate and to capture methane, but I don't know how far ahead that is.
So we want to reduce that methane.
We want to reduce all carbon, well, as many greenhouse gas emissions as possible, and carbon dioxide in particular. And methane is a very potent form of greenhouse gas that emits more harm than carbon dioxide. So
it's interesting because, you know, in countries like India, we use cow dung for so many things, like actually burning stuff, like creating fire, and it's a source of fuel.
Yes.
So we want to bring that down. Is that right?
Well, ideally, although, you mean, to the best of my knowledge, a lot of Indian farmers are small scale farmers. So to have one or two or however many, you know, small number of cows on a farm is actually potentially regenerative. But I'm speaking about the large scale livestock farms that are like millions of cows, for example, you know, that are specifically created for the meat industry. That's a different world.
Yes, that's a different scale altogether. But that's really interesting. So that is really enlightening for me, because I didn't know that whole connection of what we are doing there.
Yes.
So, wow. Okay. Yes. Because, you know, they're mass producing animals now. And David Attenborough is one of my favorite, you know, documentary creators of all time. And he's done quite a recent production on showing how our planet's consumption of chicken, beef, and all these, cattle-like animals is synthetic production. Like, it's not even natural production. So you're not even eating what you think you're eating.
That's right. Yeah, it's actually quite detrimental to your health long term.
Yes. So it's like,
and there's of course there's the fishes too as well, because we're overfishing the oceans, and so then the oceans are out of balance in so many levels for different reasons as well. And so there's all the layers. There's so much more as well.
I think people get scared because people get scared by just thinking about all the effects, but then I think contextualization is so important when it comes to educating ourselves about how it happens right here in front of me, and what are the options that I have other than what I eat right now. Also, part of this society's way of celebrating and the way we carry ourselves through restaurants and, and celebrating culture and everything like that. I think animal products are kind of a delicacy or some sort of a praised thing. But it's funny that the educated and the wealthy don't have this need to correct and become more advocates towards this mission of reducing, this trend of feeding and eating and consuming such a detrimental thing,
Yeah, totally. Some are, thankfully, although it's not. I don't think it's the majority yet. I mean, no,
it's not.
I might be wrong. And again, it kind of as well. We were, I was discussing earlier that it's so ingrained in culture. Like that generation really grew up on, or like you were saying, you go to a restaurant and celebrate, and there's the delicacies. Like in the Chinese culture, there's the lobsters. The lobsters are the delicacies. If you don't have a lobster on your table and celebrating anything, you're not worthy of. You're not good enough or something. And as an example, and it's a lot to unwind in terms of like these cultural memes and meaning stories that we've a lot of us potentially have accepted or not accepted, and it will take time, but it's.
But can I also add to that, Kana? There's another look on this, the diet culture that propagates that, by going live plant-based, look at all these celebrities looking so fit and healthy. But Ayurveda, like food sciences like that, wouldn't actually advocate that everybody went plant-based, because there's always something that you would need to understand, that your body changes, it has different needs. So we don't have to just always focus in on that particular approach. We can look at it as, well, like you said about the purchasing, the consumerism topic, which is ask yourself, like, why do you need this, and what will it give you, and make the choices based on, well, what's the most sustainable thing I can have right now? Like, if I'm gonna demand that I need beef to get iron, this is one big, topic. But people don't give up eating certain things or cut out everything because they want a certain type of body, because the media has educated them that this is what you can look like if you do this, which is false idea of health in the first place and longevity. So when we talk about this, I feel like going plant-based, yes, and then also educate yourself, because a lot of people are addicted to many aspects of food being a certain way, considering flavoring that we grow up with, flavors, preparations, and styles of cooking and everything like that. So what do you recommend people start to look at before you know, kind of deciding like what's the way to shift away from, you know, being I have to have the lobster, otherwise I'm gonna get a migraine, you know, like, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah,
without
I hear you.
lobster, my daughter won't turn 21.
Oh my gosh, I know, right? Oh, I mean, it's such a big question in terms of people's
Yeah.
diet choices. And of course, I'm no dietitian or a specialist.
No, it's not a, yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, I feel like in my experience and what I've witnessed, it really is so potent when you really reflect and take the time to research on your own health
Yeah.
and how a plant-based diet, how much health benefits, not from the externalized, like you were saying, you know, the Instagram influences, but really like what it can do to your cells and how your organs work and how your vibrancy of every day can be shifted from a meat-based diet to a plant-based diet, and really research the health effects
Yes.
of different chemicals that these companies feed these animals. You know, like really just be like curious and take that responsibility on yourself, because you know it's an illusion that anyone external, like if you don't want to make a change, no one external really is going to make that much of an effect on you, right? So especially when it comes to food and how you connect with sustenance and how you connect with that which offers us nutrients, and that again, that's what it kind of flows from our previous conversation about connection to something organic in your life, like an organic process. So yeah, it's
that's potent. That's potent. What I did on my journey is I grew up in a Bengali household where, you know, everything is non-veg as well as veg, but when we grew up here, it's like it wasn't like I wanted to be a vegan or vegetarian or anything like that. I just started listening to my body and looking at the fact that, oh my God, my stomach really can't handle this food. You know, it just not doesn't suit my digestion. So I always recommend looking at your digestion as well. Like, you know, there is a lot happening, and this is such a natural law, you know, and you can't avoid that. You can't cover that up. You can't keep covering it up, you know. And yeah, so I think it really connects with your your tip, which is number 3, is like looking at a plant. Well, go towards that which is natural, closer toward what is harmonious for you. Harmonious, which is always plant-based, because which is always a natural and vivacious living natural thing, than what is being mass produced, created from this industrial need.
Context,
Which is,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Said, darling.
What is the 4th one?
I think we touched on the 4th one, didn't we? Although we could we could
you
focus
said something about
having respect for the different roles of how people contribute to our society, you know, and having deeper gratitude around, you know, how our modern lifestyle is offered to us. I think when we reflect on all the different roles that it takes to have your lifestyle, I think there's a lot to be grateful for. And when that gratitude reflection process has its way with you to some degree, in my experience, you see a world full of like places where you can serve and situations where you can serve, rather than it being overwhelming. I would say that's the 4th advice or tip.
So that's great. I like that, because you know what, I'm doing a lot of it already. What you just mentioned, 1, 2, 3, 4, I'm doing a lot of it already. And just like making any changes in your life, take it one step at a time. I think you don't have to, like we said at the beginning, you know, it's like, I don't think it has to be all in one, you know, just strip everything off and become this, whatever the society wants you to be, like the global warming society wants you to be, because it's not, doesn't have to be like that at all, you know. But because, you know, there's so many factors at play to making it happen and living a joyful life, you know. No one is asking anyone to suffer and live in despair either, you know. Can I ask you that, do you find anyone misaligned in your industry? Like, do you find that people don't walk their talk?
Yeah, potent question, darling. I mean, it's one of the core challenges that a number of us are focused on recalibrating and rebalancing. One of the core challenges in our industry, and so one of the industries I work in is the global capital markets, and in particular raising finance for green projects, for example, or ethical projects or social impact projects, right? And so one of the trends that we're witnessing is, given the rise of interest in this field, we're seeing a lot of stakeholders and quote unquote players in the field who are impact washing and greenwashing their projects. So they're coming out and saying, oh, we're raising all of this money and we're going to use it for these projects, and it sounds all great, and yet when you look under the layers, a lot of them are actually not integrous with what their words are and their actions.
That is amazing. So me, as someone that wants to invest put money into these projects, how do I track where my money goes? How do I know who to work with?
Right, that's one of the key solutions a number of us are working on. So we're working on independent third-party verifiers, to then perhaps, you know, give a verification code, or, you know, like, you know, in choice.com.au, you know, you get a tick, for example, or Heart Foundation, you get a tick. We're working on that because right now it's kind of the wild, wild west. And like, right, and even in people like us in the industry, it takes a lot of our resources and time to research so many different projects or fund managers or you know, people who espouse this, and so it's a big risk, and so that's one thing for someone like yourself would be, you know, do your best to take your time to research yourself.
Who you get connected to and collaborate or contribute with.
And really be discerning in your choices. And I know it's a big ask because there's a long list of to-dos for all of us on a daily level.
Is there any site people can go to check out who's been banned or who's been actually flagged? There's nothing like that either.
That's the point, is like, that's one of the projects that are very high priority for us. You know, we'd love to create an app or a platform. And I mean, there's certain ratings, of course. There's the S&Ps and the Moody's, like their industry ratings in terms, like, you know, they rate certain investments, you know, from A, like AAA to AA to A or B or whichever. Although respectfully, they're giving ratings too easily too. You know, behind the scenes, they may have different agreements with their favorite clients, you know, for example. And so it's a big challenge and a big risk. So it's quite one of our highest priorities, and we're working on it and we're doing our best.
So if someone, look, this is what I'm hearing, and tell me if this is something that you want to add to it or I've got it wrong. So the first thing is, you know, we look at the micro level, which is a person, you know, looking at your 4 tips that you gave, you know, and then that's a big shift, you know, that's like the long-term view. With the long-term view, you're taking little steps, baby steps towards creating that big shift. And at the same time, you know, if you know, a lot of us like to donate, a lot of us like to contribute towards social change in ways that we can, you know, we don't have to sit on our hands while we get to that long-term vision, you know. So what's a place we can go to check out how we can become active? Like you said, you mentioned the councils, the local councils.
That's
but apart from that, what's a really, you know, good place to go and look for organizations to become partners with?
I mean, again, there's no full-on like collective database and that has vetted social change organizations.
What are some of the search words that people should use?
The social enterprise, that would be one. You know, in terms of, I would highly recommend people, like, as much as I love the charity model,
Again,
it's a
same
broken
thing.
model. Yeah, it's a broken model. And I would highly suggest and encourage people, find your local social entrepreneurs, who are people who are trying to create a new model of like the best of the enterprise world, the best of the business world in terms of our skill sets and our deliverabilities, but also the best of the heart and soul world, because that's only then that we create new industries and new enterprises that are based on a fusion of these values, rather than the quote unquote handout model of the charities, which is not sustainable.
No,
and then
it's
of course
not.
and of course the pure profit world is also not sustainable. So really invest in shared surplus world. And I know they're somewhat hard to find, because a lot of us are just heads down, bums up, working on the solutions. So social enterprise, local social entrepreneurs, I would say one of that would be the other search term.
And what about shares or stocks or trades, or in the investment, the investment world? Who would be the ones that you would put money towards?
I mean, one of
the top three.
Yeah, one of the most ethical banks globally is called Triodos. They're based in Europe. Triodos.
Okay,
to the
that's
best of my knowledge,
bank.
it's one of the most ethical banks in the world. So, I mean, that's an example. Like, find your local credit union, find your local mutual bank. These are banking financial institutions that are customer owned. That's what they mean, mutual banks and credit unions. They would most likely be sponsoring some sort of social enterprise locally. Invest in them, like invest in Bank Australia, for example. And this is a disclaimer that this isn't quote unquote official investment advice to people, but this is a suggestion towards your own research, of course. And for example, Nature Conservancy is a very innovative charity, quote unquote, but they're becoming a social enterprise because they're getting into the impact investment world. So so it's like these fusion models, sort of like anomalies of nature. I love it. It's like beautiful examples of evolution, nature and evolution. So those are 3 examples. But
I think I've met people that invest in like organizations that you give them money and they'll plant some trees, and that grows in. Is that the nature conservationists?
I think the TNC, Nature Conservancy, like that's one of their programs, but they also do a number of different awesome nature projects as well.
Nature projects,
awesome. I mean, it's a whole plethora.
There you go. That's amazing.
Yeah, and for example, I think they're called the Nature's Defenders Office. They're like a state organization, but not state in terms of they're an organization of lawyers, and they specifically defend nature in legal cases. So they need donations. So it's like this. Yeah, they're like a fusion hybrid as well.
Amazing.
So
thank you, Kana. That's amazing. That's a lot of things. I will put all that into a list, and I will put it in for the listeners and the viewers to access when they need it. And I might also write up a blog about it with all the resources that you've mentioned, because I think this is what we need. We need to talk about it. We need to kind of get started. We need to encourage our peers, our children, our sisters, brothers, friends. And it's noteworthy that that we're moving away more and more from what we can actually do very easily, because we are all tired. We understand that we're all tired, but the tiredness is also coming from this whole problem, so we need to look at it. This is not something we should look at. We should ignore. We can't, not anymore, because
absolutely.
Yeah, and it's all interconnected, and that's the beauty of it. I feel like people feel more enthusiastic about something when they can see it's going to benefit them as well as benefit others quite easily. So we really want to take that approach towards this movement where we make it easy. Yeah. So, any parting words?
Thank you, of course, darling. Thank you again. It's always heartwarming, endearing, inspiring, encouraging to share time with you and riff and you know, be on the frontier with you. I love this, and
Thank you.
you know, it's such a joy and a blessing, and it's, you know, for example, one of them, I feel like intuitively one of the potential areas where we could co-host in time is like, you know, local sort of community town halls, or whether it's climate change focused themes or other areas, and to amplify these types of conversations to that next stage. So I look forward to how it all emerges, darling, and thank you again for your service and leadership and showing up in this space and beyond.
Thank you, Kana. It's really, really a pleasure. I really wanted to ask you this question. I'm sorry I forgot it, but I actually wanted to ask you, what are you working on currently? What's your major project you're working on?
So I think I mentioned a few of them during our talk, although, you know, I'm doing my best to balance
Too
between
fast. I didn't catch it.
I'm doing my best to balance between offering the solutions at a macro level, and then equally being very grounded and rooted in the micro as well. And so on the macro level, I'm working with a lot of capital markets globally to support the increase of social stock exchanges. So stock exchanges that are based on social ethical investment fundraisers. So it's exciting, and it's, you know, multi-decade long missions. And of course the growth, and before that is also the growth of green stock exchanges, and there's a few of them globally, that we need many more of them. So, and then creating and raising investment funds to and any type of system support for this burgeoning industry. So yeah, so it's pretty geeky, but it's very exciting, because it's, in some ways, it's a top of the waterfall solution, because once we create solutions in that field, then all the trickle effect and the ripple effects of pretty much, you know, everyone or anyone who needs support around a regenerative or sustainable or ethical green project, ideally in good time, will then get access to these funds that are right now not being mobilized, not as mobilized towards this field as much as other fields, for example, fossil fuels, you know, or other extractive industries. So that's the macro level of what I'm working on. And within that, there's also, of course, investments in different policy-making organizations, or whether they're current or creating new ones, like creating new lobby organizations, or investing in you know, different alliances of new, for example, lawyers that want to just focus on regenerative, sustainable law. So again, that's the plumbing that I'm speaking of. That's really necessary. So
I love it. I love it. So I just want to put a thing on that. Can we like have a conversation in a few months, or whenever you are comfortable, because it's quite inspiring to start talking about how our economy can get boosted through these kinds of projects. Would you mind coming back to talk about this and talk about what are some of the central questions we're asking for these projects, about what are we trying to solve here? I would love to bring you back on that.
It'd be an honor, darling. I mean, it just as a
very aligned.
you know, just sorry, darling.
It's very aligned.
Absolutely. And it's so, you know, just as a one example of a statistic, we you know, in terms of the next 3 decades till 2050, you know, part of our industry has agreed that there is a need to mobilize $80 trillion over the next 3 decades towards these projects. And that amount of capital, which is very much possible over 3 decades. And so we're talking, you know, $3 to $5 to $6 trillion a year, given that the global market is around $290 trillion a year currently. It's not only doable, it's imperative. And so that's a sort of an overarching goal that a number of us are aiming towards. And so then we move and we design that backwards in terms of certain funds and certain stock exchanges and so forth. So so yes, I mean, on a micro level, I'm working on launching a number of projects and regenerate. Like one of them's going to be called Regenify, and so these types of platforms that are more accessible to the everyday person and supporting them how to then integrate these changes and to reward them as well, to actually, you know, offer credit and so forth. And so I'm also looking at blockchain solutions, and I love all the different solutions that we can cross-pollinate, you know, different solutions from different emerging fields. So yeah, those are two examples. But there's watch this space. There's a lot that is humming,
Yes.
and you'd be one of the first to know, darling. You and your listeners.
Yeah, I love bringing spirituality and real world together. I love it.
Indeed.
Well, thank you so much, dear sister of mine. It was lovely, lovely, lovely chatting with you. It's always so soulful. Time passes so quickly, you know, but it was rich. It was rich. It was very rich. So thank you so much. Love to connect with you very soon again. But yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Supriya. It's been a delight. To evermore. We got this.
Yes, we got this.